So 3D parts, they're all printed in lightweight PLA. This is one of the exhausts for the 64mm. Give it a wee bit of paint, wee afterburner type paint job inside. Needs a wee bit of sanding, but I think I'm just going to go with it just now, and I think I'll have a wee look near the end of the build, but it's lightweight PLA, should finish off pretty well. I've got the colour shift paint on the outside of it as well. Looks pretty nice. These are done, I think it was two walls, 0% infill. Thrust tubes, just one wall. As you can see, there's a bit of a seam there, that's a Z seam with a lightweight PLA. Obviously it's a lot larger than normal PLA. On the inside there is, again, a bit of a rib there. So possibly have a look at sanding that back, or maybe even filing it a little. Wee bit of cleaning up, touching up to do with removing the excess stringing. But it looks great. Same with the intakes. You can see there again, there's a Z seam with a lightweight PLA. On the outside I'm not really bothered about that too much. But on the inside I'll try and give it again a little smoothing off, a wee sand back so it's nice and smooth. The air brake, this looks superb, can't wait to get this operational. Obviously we'll just glue that together. Again, you know, with the stringing there's a little bit of tidying up needing done there, a wee bit of sanding. Scrape most of it off. Unfortunately there's not a lot you can do with the excess stringing with the lightweight PLA because it foams. Then the next part, this was done one wall, 0% infill. This part was done two walls. I think I've got, I'm not sure if there's much infill, might have been 5%, 10%. Yeah. As you can see there's a slight bit of infill in that one, just because it's the air brake itself. I thought I wasn't want to just have it as a skeleton, so to speak. The hub itself, again, possibly 10%. You can see there's very little infill inside. I think it was three walls on this, just because it's a structural part, so it was a wee bit stiffer. The intakes itself, two walls, 0% infill. Let's have a look. Yeah, 0% infill in there. Two walls, and they look absolutely fantastic. The finish was great. They look really nice. No cleaning up needed whatsoever. You can see there's a couple of small beads. Maybe need to have a look at trying to dial in the print a wee bit, but looks great. The tail parts, again, this was two walls, 0% infill. As you can see there, no infill in it whatsoever, and I've already glued them together. A wee bit of sanding just to have them nice and smooth and flush. The mechanism for the air brake itself, printed in PLA plus, just for strength. I think I did three, yeah, it looks like maybe 3 or 4 walls, and I don't think there's any infill in this. Not sure about it. Oh, yeah, just a touch. I think 5% in there, maybe. And again, this one was printed like so. And if we look at it, maybe we'll see, changed it to about 4 walls, just so that there was this strength. I think the standard was 2, but I changed it to 4 just so there's a wee bit of more structural strength. Then the cells itself and the covers, 0% infill, 2 walls. You could probably have got away with 1 wall, but I just printed it in 2 because, as you can see there, again with the lightweight PLA, there's just a wee bit additional. If it was PLA itself, it would have been a fantastic smooth finish. Bit of lightweight, so we'll give that a wee bit of sand in itself. Exhaust bulkhead, lightweight PLA, very flexible, but there's no, I don't see any structural difference. You can see there's 0% infill. I think it was four or five walls, but there's zero infill there. And then the nose cone, again, well, can't really see it, but there's zero infill inside that, and I've got two walls as well. The only reason I've got two walls on it is, again, I will be giving it a wee bit of sand, and if it was one wall, it would be very, very flexible and wouldn't really hold the sandpaper very well, or at least, you know, force back. The Z-seam, I've got it running along the bottom so that when it's when it's built, you won't see it anyway. Other than that, printed off the canopy. Again, 0% infill. You can see some of the fluff on the inside with the excess. But I won't be using this. This is only for the sake of shaping it up to, sizing it up, sorry, to the fuselage itself and getting the right shape before we attach the canopy, the clear canopy from Craig. I have cut the EDF bulkheads and the mounts and things. Also, out of 3mm ply, you know, I cut all the parts, the air brake tray, the cover for the tray, the support, the spar, the carbon spar bulkheads, and I also cut the elevator reinforcers out of the 3mm ply. My woodwork skills is not the best, so I mean they'll probably work, they'll probably be fine. However, I threw it into Fusion 360 as well, and printed them off in lightweight PLA, and we'll see what I'm thinking. I mean, absolutely bang on, perfect for what I'm needing, and certainly a lot cleaner than my 3mm plies. And I should imagine this will work pretty well, just probably better than that, but it will have a nicer fit and not as much, you know, sanding and filling required. I have the bulkhead supports in 3mm ply, and I will be using these, I think. The EDF mounts fit pretty well. As you can see, it's not the best, it's certainly not perfect. There is a wee bit of ziggy zaggy stuff going on, but I have tried them. They do fit in there, but again, we'll have another wee look before we go to building it all together, putting it. These again, I think, is elevator supports, which I've also done in lightweight PLA. Came out fantastic. You can maybe weigh them up, see what the story is. Let's just move these parts aside and get the scales out. All in 178 grams for the lightweight PLA. Let's move that, see. 178 grams lightweight PLA, fantastic. Like I say, could probably go to a touch lighter, printing some of the pieces in one wall, but in terms of the intakes, I would rather have a two wall, 0% infill, nice clean finish so that there's a bit of strength for sanding. Yeah, lightweight PLA, 3D printed parts, absolutely fantastic addition to our Detpron part checks. Let's get into the build. Have also printed the elevator control arms, which is a superb design from Craig. I think it was the Nat, which originally those are the Nat ones. So what I've done, threw it into Fusion 360, extended this part, extended that part, and that should, let's have a look, should fit the elevator. Superb. Horizontal stabilizer. So the idea is that these will slide right in there. Gives a bit of strength there for the control movement itself, and a good bit of support out to here. The intention is to use this so that I just have a rod going through the fuselage itself and slide these on. I may need to look at putting a little more space there and cut it out to get a end stop in.
So let's get on with the build. The F-15 Eagle for Craig, absolutely stunning design. Going with a twin 64 FMS. In the build, I'm only going to use 5-minute, 30-minute epoxy, and I think it was 1 and a bit tubes of Yoo-Hoo Pour. So the first step, I've chose the powertrain, and we're on to the belly panel and the bulkhead number 1. A lot of this is relatively simple, like most of the builds. There is a couple of things that I do quite differently in terms of the build guide, but we'll explain that as we go through it. And the next step's the canopy support pieces onto the forward fuselage. So I've got the 2 of them out, and then the canopy support pieces, like I usually do, just a small amount of glue, smudge it about so you've got a very thin application. Offer it up to the sides and line it up, stick that into place, and job done. So here's the belly panel. I've just lined it up to the sides, the fuselage sides. Got a wee pen and marked it up as to where the glue is going to go. It's probably not needed. If you just put the glue onto the belly panel itself, then there's no reason to be drawing lines. But I get carried away sometimes, overthinking things. So just a small amount of glue on one side, in the location hole as well, and then offer up the belly panel to the fuselage side. What I've done, I've got some modelling pins and I just tack it into place just to hold it. If I was to use a contact glue like it should be used, just, you know, apply some glue, offer both of them up so there's glue on both surfaces, and then peel them back and allow it to, you know, air dry slightly. Then there's probably no any need for the modelling pins. So same with the opposite side. Some glue, offer it up and slide it into position. Make sure you tack it at the front. Next step is the carbon spar support and the receiver shelf. So again, very simple with the receiver shelf. A wee bit of glue on both sides. Offer up, slot it into place. And then I've got some 5-minute epoxy that I'm using to hold in the 3mm ply carbon spar support. However, be mindful of the orientation that you put this in. I got carried away and excited and just slapped it in there, lined it up, let the 5-minute epoxy set, and then realised I had it in back to front. So what I did was I measured, cut it out and just flipped it round. There is a couple of tabs there at the top. I'll take them off and then put them back into the front where the wee gap is. So just be mindful when you're putting that in. Next step's the forward turtle deck and the bridge panels. So again, small amount of glue just in the contact surfaces where it meets up. Slide it into position. And again, I've got a couple of modelling pins that I'm just putting in and holding it into place. And here I'm actually doing the magnet panel as well. Just moving along and doing all the pieces that I can at the same time. The build guide says it should be the bridge panels first, but I'm just moving along. Again, a couple of modelling pins, just pulling it out so it's nice and level at the sides. And a couple of wee pins just to hold it into place. Scrap piece of foam, tidying up any excess glue. And then the bridge panel at the front here. So there's a bridge panel inner. Again, just teasing it out, line it up, tease it out and put a couple of modelling pins in place just to hold it. And allow the glue to cure. So as we say, the next step should be the magnet panel and the belly panel outer. But I've already done the magnet panel, so on the bridge panel here, once the inner one had dried, got the middle one and the outer one, applied a small amount of glue and offered it up. Now I have got a wee spacer for those eagle eyes at the front. I've actually blown this plan up to 105% just to give me a wee bit extra space in the back of the bay and round about, because parts of it looked quite tight. So here's the belly panel. I've put some glue on the contact surface, then just on the underside I'm just putting some glue on the side so that when it slides it in, it's not just on the flat panel itself. So there's the glue, I'm just smudging it right along so there's an even coating all the way along it. And I didn't actually sand it down before I put it on here, if you've noticed. What I did is put that on, and now I'm going to go and sand it. The next step should be the forward fuselage sides and the nose cone aligner. So there's the nose cone aligner, a tiny wee bit of glue, just slot that into place. And then the sides, what I've done is kept the plans, and then I'll just cut off the marking part itself and just freehand just trim it off. And what I'll do is I'll offer this up to the side of the fuselage and then mark it as to where the panel's due to go. So I'll offer it up at the front, make sure it's level, then just a couple of wee pen marks to show where the side panel's going to go. Obviously flip the plans round the opposite direction, and again offer it up and just a couple of wee marks on it. So make sure when you're doing this, using this technique, you do it with the opposite sides like that. Small amount of glue and smudge it about so that all the surface is covered, and it's a very thin application. It works very well. The less glue on it, the quicker it sticks. And there we go, just an RB press just to affirm that it's all the areas are in contact. Next step's the nose cone, and I'm going with the single canopy as well. As you can see, I've printed the canopy off just for terms of measuring up and things. Now this part is the sanding. I actually did the sanding off camera. And then the wee splitter panels, what I've done is I've put the 3mm splitter panel in first, which will leave me a small gap. And then I'm going in with the 6mm panel next. That way it just slides straight in and there's a gap there that helps locate it, rather than putting the 6mm in first and then the 3mm. Next step's lower fuselage pieces and building the 3mm ply support for the ADF mounts. So I've just marked a 6mm line along the bottom pieces and just offering it up. There was a slight curve on it which I'd kind of formed on the side of the table. So just making sure there's glue on both sides of the contact surfaces there. Then flip it over and offer it up, and again using some modelling pins here, just holding it into place because there's a slight curve on it and you're only held at one corner. It's a wee bit delicate. So just working your way along it, make sure it's lined up nice, straight to the edge. A couple of modelling pins, like I say, and just tack it into place. Pretty simple so far. And then the spar brace for the EDF version. What I've done is I've cut them out of 3mm ply, as you can see there, and apply a small amount of epoxy, the 5-minute epoxy on the inside. Put it onto a couple of rods just to ensure that the pathway through it was nice and straight. And then using a couple of clamps, just clamp it together to make sure, you know, I've got a good contact on the surfaces. So the next step should be the fuselage outer pieces and sorting out the tail. So what I've done here is I've just moved straight onto the tail and taped up the underside, and then a wee bit of tape on both sides of the opposite side here, just so that when we add the epoxy we can insert the 1mm carbon spar and then just give it a nice clean up, because it's going to be, you know, visible as the tail piece itself. And then I'm just forcing the epoxy into the slot there. As it's only 1mm, just be careful that you've actually got it in there. And I'm using a scrap piece of foam again just to force it in. Insert the 1mm spar, and then I'm using an extra piece just to make sure it's nice and flat and leveling in there. Remove the excess pieces of tape and it should be nice and clean. So I'm now moving on to the side pieces as well. You can see here we've got the underside taped just like we did with the vertical stabilizers, and again just applying a small amount of epoxy in there. I've already measured up the 1mm carbon spar for it and cut it to the size that's needed. Here I'm not actually taping it up for a cleaner surface on the top, because it's at the tail. It's not going to be seen, it's not visible, so I see no need to, you know, make sure it's nice and tidy. I'm sure there will be fellow builders out there that will make sure it's nice and tidy, but each to their own. And then here I'm moving on, because I've got the epoxy out and I'm filling up pieces and things. Decided to just go with all the parts that need epoxied. Now here we've got the elevator controls, which again, like I said earlier, is from the Nat. It's a fantastic design by Craig, and I've just enlarged them and they fit the elevator fantastic. So again, in with some 5-minute epoxy and just tease it out. Make sure you've got the sides all covered, so that when the slot goes in, it's not just sticking to the bottom here as we look at it, but actually on the sides as well. There's not a lot needed. Just making sure it's teased it to the sides, and then in with the elevator support or the control mechanism. Tape that up and just set it to the side and let it dry. We tidy up with some spare epoxy there. So going back to the guide itself, moving on to the spar braces. Now that they were set with the epoxy, what I've done there, I've just put it onto a piece of foam just so that I can get the mouth of the EDF unit nice and flush against the EDF support spars itself, and just tacking it in place with a bit of hot glue, lining it up to make sure that the wires are on the inside, testing it with the ESCs just to make sure I've got the right orientation, so that later on in the build, when we go to putting it in place, we have the wires marked correctly. Worked fantastic. So the next step is to dry fit and move on to the splitters. So here I have the 3mm splitters, and just sanding the edge so that it's tapered and we get a nice fix to the fuselage sides itself, the inner fuselage, and using a wee bit of tape to mark it up. What I've done is I've actually used a bit of hot glue here just to make sure it's bonded all the way along, and probably for quickness as well. But my thoughts were, well, as it's a 3mm piece, the hot glue will hold it pretty much for good. And do the same with the opposite side. Let's say with the hot glue, you put that on and then just hold it for 2 or 3 minutes, let's say. So here we are test fitting the EDF unit itself. It slid, the 3mm ply part slid in very well, and then the rear bulkhead, it fitted, but I needed to put a wee spacer on the back as well. This is probably due to the fact I just cut it out. I just cut it out because the plans were enlarged to 105, then obviously it was a bit bigger than needed. So as you can see, I've got wee formers on at the back of the EDF unit. What I've done here is I've got a pen, a Sharpie, and marked each wire. One wire had no markings on, the other wire had one, and then the last wire had 2 markings on it. That way when I actually go to put them together and get them in, I know which wire goes into what location. As you can see, I've already extended the wires from the ESC itself. Now this was quite tricky. I've printed the thrust tube, offered up a small amount of glue. Now there is locating tabs on this, which is very helpful and handy just to make sure you've got the right alignment. Offer up some Yoo-hoo pour to it. Make sure it's tacked, like you can see there, so that it's on both sides. Give it a wee chance to air dry and then offer it and let it cure. And then do the same with the opposite side. But just, make sure you've got the arrow pointing upwards and there's a wee notch points to the outside. So again, do the same with the opposite tube. And like I say, with the markings on it, I'd offered, with the markings on it, I knew which plug was to go into which, so that way when the ESCs are connected, we're running in the right orientation. And we're not trying to fly backwards. Now the spacing here is quite tight. So again, test fitted up, got all the wires in place, and then I'm using 30-minute epoxy here. Just to make sure that, 5 minutes is a wee bit tight. So I'll put the 30-minute epoxy in just to make sure that, I've got it lined up properly and I'm quite happy with everything. Make sure it's pushed through to the underside and it's nice and flush. And what I did here, there is a couple of holes in the side where you're supposed to push the ESC wires through. But as you can see, it's quite tight in there, and me and my fat fingers, I decided what was best to do was just cut a relief in the top, put the wires in, and then glue them back later when I've got the ESC unit in. So here we're doing the back corner pieces, the supports at the rear, because obviously when we sand down, cut away at the back, we will be removing a lot of the foam just to get that nice curved shape at the exhaust. So just offer the 2 of them up to each other and get the 4 pieces. So here I am now moving on to the intakes. Now it doesn't, this is partly later on in the build, but what I've done is I've chose to build all the internals first. Get that ready before I start putting on the outsides and stuff. Like I say, it was a bit tight, and for me I thought this was probably the best approach. With the intakes there, obviously you can see in the foam, I've just marked away where they sit, and I've got a bit of glue there just to make sure that it's tacked on both sides. It's all done with lightweight PLA, which is quite flexible. So just making sure they're glued on all the contact surfaces. Be interesting to hear what Tobias did. Tobias built the first F-15. Flew fantastic. So it'll be interesting to hear what he's actually did. So now that I've got the insides all built, now it's time to move on to the side panels. As you can see there, I've got the rear supports in place as well. Somehow or other I managed to miss that off the video. Whether it was the recording or what, I just couldn't find it. It's probably due to all the excitement we're actually building the F-15. I can't wait. So on the contact surfaces, just apply a small amount of glue, offer it up in place, and just tease it in. This was nice and tight, which I did like. And just at the back there, using a small modelling pin to tack it into place. And then moving along here, what I chose to do was put the modelling pins on the inside, thinking, you know, I don't want to get holes on the outside. Makes no difference when it, because at the end of the day I'm going to sand it. We'll be painting it and stuff. There will be some filler, so a tiny wee modelling pill hole, not really going to make much difference. And just do the same with the opposite side. Some glue along the contact surface. Make sure you get it down the side of the intake itself. And then again, just tack it along just to make sure that it's nice and flush and level. Again, getting excited with myself, putting some modelling pins on the inside. Numpty. But it's looking fantastic so far. So the next step should be the 3D printed intakes. Now that it's all put together, it's looking gorgeous. As you can see, I've got the wires fed through the RX tray and stuff itself. So here we're using 5-minute epoxy. Just off the camera slightly there, apologies. Offer it up into place, and there was a nice fit, and I'm thinking, how am I going to hold this on? So I chose to let it just set ever so slightly, and unfortunately I take it off the build table. As you can see, it's lying horizontal and it will just fall off, so I chose to take it off the build table and hold it. Unfortunately, this was off camera. I'm using a bit of tape just to hold it in place. And here we are off camera, holding it so that it's vertical. I'm sure you can imagine what's going on there. Hold it till it's vertical and then apply both pieces. And I held it for the 5 minutes just to make sure both parts were set in place. So the next step is the exhaust bulkhead. Printed it in the lightweight PLA as I mentioned earlier. There is no real structural part to this other than the tabs on the outside, which are used to locate the vertical stabilisers. So here's hoping this is strong enough to hold them in place. I'm sure with all the glue and things at the vertical stabiliser, these parts should be fine until I hit a tree possibly. This fitted very well, small amount of glue, and just push it onto the thrust tubes itself. So the rear fuselage outer piece, we're doing that as the next step. Now that the internals is pretty much all built, just a small amount of glue along the contact surfaces. Pretty simple. And just a wee bit in the locating tabs itself as well. Offer it up to the fuselage, just squeeze into place. We've got a wee bit of glue just underneath the spar mounts there, the 3mm ply. And then do the same with the opposite side. Small amount of glue along it. And just offer it up, squeeze it into place. Simple. So excited about this. And I'm just using a wee bit of tape at the back there, just to make sure it's nice and flush and level with the rear parts, the exhaust bulkhead. So now that that's done, Just got a wee, the fronts there, the 3mm splitter. What I've done is I've just cut a wee bit of foam, just as an extra support there, just a wee triangle piece. And I've just teased that into place, just so it's holding on to the intake itself. And as we've already built the supports, I thought I had it on camera, but I'm not actually too sure. The wee parts at the back there, again, I had them in 3mm ply, but I chose to just print them with a lightweight PLA. Wee bit of tape on the underside of both. And then I'm just using a wee bit of epoxy here. As you can see, just a couple of small dots about the size of a pea, if that. And we're just putting it around the contact surface here of the Depron itself. Put the first one in, and then again just a wee bit on the top, trying to stay away from the hole itself. Again, pretty simple. And like I say, apologies about no following the guide to the T, but I was just building the way I seen it best for myself. So the next one, just applying a small amount of glue, and like I do, just smudge it about. So it's a very thin application, and just line it up between the hole and the wee slot there for the the exhaust bulkhead. Make sure they're lined up as straight as possible. And then the next couple of parts, including the 6mm carbon slot, as you can see on the left there, I've actually built them up with the extra pieces, but again, for whatever reason, I've not got it on camera. I'm sure you can figure out how to put a 6mm carbon spar, and sure, there's about 10mm coming out the back. So I've got a wee bit of epoxy in the EDF bulkhead itself in the slots, and I'm putting some Yoo-Hoo pour along the bottom, the contact surfaces of the elevators, not the elevators, the vertical stabilizer. And what I'm doing here is I'm using the carbon rod through both of them to make sure that both of them are absolutely flush, and in that way, when I go to putting on the elevators itself, I know they're straight each side. As you can see here, I cut out the vertical stabilizer, and for whatever reason it just fell through. So I was quite happy knowing that by using the carbon rod through the elevator slots, I knew it would be nice and straight. So onto the side pieces here, again a small amount of glue. I have actually tapered it off just at the end there, and this will locate up to the exhaust bulkhead. Small amount of glue along the contact surface. Now there is a small bend in it. I did give it a small curve on the table, but there's probably no need with using modelling pins, because you can see I'm just tacking it in place all the way along, and it follows the curve anyway, and the modelling pins hold it in place. So just doing the same with the opposite side itself. It's looking stunning. Can't wait to get this up in the air. I've seen Tobias' video and his flight was amazing. So now that most of that's done, it's time to get on to the wing. Now, like with fitting the carbon spars into the wings, I've taped along the underside just so it's nice and clean. What I would normally call the presentation side on a flat plate wing. However, with the airfoil design in this, it's gonna look stunning. So a wee bit of tape along the bottom, tease it out, and then I'm using the 5-minute epoxy and some, in fact, was it 5 minute? Yeah, that's 5 minute epoxy that I've got there, and using some micro balloons as well, just to fill it up. As you can see, there was about 14 grams all in for both sides, and I did have some spare in it. So again, just make sure you have the sides of the Depron covered, so that when the spar goes in, it's not just sitting in a pool of epoxy, it's actually contacting the sides of the wing plate itself. And a wee bit additional across the top. At this point, I wasn't really worried about it not looking too pretty, because it's going to sit on the inside, and you're not going to see it. Scrape away some of the excess, and then just allow the epoxy to cure and go off. Once that's done, pull off the tape to find an absolute stunning finish, and then just offer it up to the fuselage just as a wee test fit, and it went in fantastic. I was so chuffed. I was kind of worried about it. So now that the bottom part's done, or yeah, the rear part, it's time to move on to the angled piece, and I've got a bit of tape in there, not all the way up, only up to the first slot, just to hold it in place. There's a wee bit additional epoxy there that I was just pulling out, cutting away the excess foam. Then again with the other side, a bit of tape on the opposite side, just to hold it in place so that it's no flapping about. Some glue on the contact surfaces, set it to the side and let it air dry slightly. I always want to make sure that this, when it goes on, it fits and it's stuck. Again, just on the locator tabs, and then on the side panels there, and a wee bit on the lips. The lips, the lips at the front there, I didn't actually sand it down so that it was nice and flush. And now I've got some 5 minute epoxy again. Sorry, this was 30 minute epoxy I used, just to make sure that if there was any adjustments needed, I had the time and the wings weren't going in offset, or in the wrong direction, one up and one down. Slide it into place, make sure it's nice and tight as far into the EDF mounts as it goes, and then I've got some EDF boxes underneath, just to ensure that both sides are nice and level. Now, once I waited until the epoxy was set and the EDF mounts, the 3mm ply there, before I moved on to this step, measured it up and cut the carbon rods, slide it into the bulkhead there for the carbon tubes. Again, small amount of epoxy, and just making sure it's teased out to the sides of the Depron, and then slide in the spar, making sure it goes into the bulkhead at the front there. A wee bit extra there, I was a wee bit short. I wasn't quite happy with the amount that was in there, so I just put in a wee bit extra. Now the wing strakes, moved on to that next. Again, I thought I had this on camera, but I'm sure laminating a piece of foam, you know how to do that. So I'd laminated once it was cured. I sanded it to the shapes that was needed. I could have sanded a bit more off. It wasn't until I'd put it on, just to get that nice curve for the F-15 shape. I had a wee bit more than was required. So a bit of Yoo-hoo Por on both sides, or whatever glue it is you choose to use, just on both of the contact surfaces, and then offer it up to the fuselage. And at this point, it's really taking shape. Just at the tops there, I could have sanded them down a bit more, but it looked awesome as it is. So next step in the guide, we've already done the elevators, so now we're moving on to the ribs. Again, a small amount of glue, just on the locator tabs and along the fuselage itself, and then do the same with the opposite side, starting with a small piece on the outside and working my way to the inner part itself. Love the airfoil design. Again, another wee squeeze on the strakes there just to make sure it's nice and tight. And then the flap servo reinforcers. We should be doing the wing transverse places, but I'll kind of do that later. So we get the flaps in, and then I got the servos in, tested them all out, and then routed the wires and stuff. And it is quite busy in there, so just take your time and make sure it's nice and neat and tidy, and you're happy with everything. So we're doing the nacelle supports, the tween, and the upper tween pieces. This part, the tail piece, that's later on in the build, but as I'm working at this part, I thought let's just get them all into place at the same time. And because I blew it up 105%, there is small bits, wee gaps here and there that, could probably have used, a bit of 3mm foam just to space things out and get it all right, but the end result was stunning anyway, well, stunning to me. So just offering up the pieces and tidying away the excess glue. Next part was the air brake. I'm so excited about this as well. Now that I've routed all the wires underneath the bulkhead up into the RX tray, it was time to get the servo in place for the air brake. So a small amount of glue, and then on with the bottom part. Make sure that you get your servo in here first, route the wires through just for ease of access. And then the top part of the tray, there is a wee lip on there where my thumb is. Test it out, guys and girls, with your servo. Actually, later on, I used a Dremel just to tidy it away because the arm itself was coming down and hitting it. So once that's built, you've got it all glued and into place. It's time to do the upper nacelle piece, the main cover. Wee bit of glue along all the contact surfaces, and I did sand down the rear part next to the intakes just for the EDF, and just made sure there was a good bit of glue across it as well. Fitted pretty fantastic. And then just allow that to set. I actually used a bit of tape, taped it up and held it together. Then there was the turtle deck housing for the receiver. Again, apologies guys, I didn't get this on camera. As you can see, there's a crazy wee bit of scrap foam on top there. There's a 3mm air brake cover going in there. But that wee extra piece of foam at the top, there was a small gap between the turtle deck and the receiver housing, so I just put a wee bit of extra foam on there so that when I sand it down, it's nice and flush. So with 3mm brake panel, again some glue, small amount along the edges there, just so that it does make some contact and it doesn't get soaked in with the twin 64s. And then offer it up into place, pull the servo through, and it looks awesome. So one of the exciting parts was the air brake itself. I couldn't wait to get this going. Printed it all, like I said earlier, in 3mm ply. There's the servo arm. I put some epoxy in there as well. Put a wee screw through the servo arm into the extension arm. Now the joining piece, I actually used a riveted wire nail, and I hammered that through and it was absolutely perfect. can't remember, I think it was about 18mm. There was no drilling need or whatever, but it fits on superb, and it held fantastic. So it's time to get it all put together and testing it. Using 1mm piano wire to get it all together. So I've got the servo in there, it's not actually glued in place at the moment, and using the arm I've got it connected up, and then just testing it out just to make sure, happy with the mechanism and how it works. Now it's time to glue it in. Now I had tested it a few times, but obviously edited all that out. And then a good bit of glue, making sure that it's, you know, held in there pretty solid. So here we have the 1mm wire, and this is quite tricky, pushing it through the air brake, kind of blind because you can't see the inside. Got it through the lever itself, but locating that hole at the other side was, yeah, very, very tricky. I think probably because I'd cut the wire to the size that I needed, and I wasn't getting much movement, so chose to take that out of there and get another piece of piano wire that I could actually bend and twist and move, and then I actually found the opposite side, as you can see, which was a bit of trouble. Sliding it down, test fitting it, yeah, it works pretty well. And then the front piece itself, again, just getting the wire. This part I'd actually cut to the right size, as you can see, push that in, and just using another piece of the wire just to push it through so that it was hidden. And then I'm trying to line it up and make sure it works fine and drops down into position, but as you can see, it was just twisting off there. I think what I had did was the wrong size of wire at the front there, the locating pin. So now that I'm happy with the back piece, moved out the front piece and put another piece of wire in, a longer piece of the 1mm piano wire, so that it was right through, and yeah, it was working a lot better. And I've got some 5-minute epoxy on the top there, which will, when it goes into the side, it'll actually meet up against the RX housing, and then some spreaded some on the bottom. Kind of held that in place. What I had to do was put in a wee 3mm spacer, slide that down, move the mechanism so it was nice and flush. Once it was set, I was quite happy with that. And we'd trim at the back there just so it was sitting nice and level. Awesome. Next part in the video here was the nacelle covers. 3D printed them. However, I think that I printed these at 100% instead of 105, I think. Did I? Because they fitted, well, it confused me. They fitted lengthwise, they fitted in absolutely perfect, but underside where you can't see, where I had the wee hobbycraft knife in there was a wee bit of a gap that I just couldn't understand. I think it may be down to the bulkhead, the foam bulkhead there. But I glued them in place, and I was quite happy with everything. So now the part for the control surfaces, the flaps and the ailerons, very, very thin part here. So cut it in half, getting the inner section. Nice bit of glue there, and then just offer it up so that both surfaces are covered. Lift it out and let it air dry slightly. And then get the flap and the ailerons. As you can see there, I've printed some TPU hinges. Flexible plastic works great. I've used it in a couple of models. And then just put the small ribs back in place as we let the contact glue set, or at least air dry slightly. When I put those wee ribs back on, it holds the elevators and flaps, no the elevators, sorry, the ailerons and the flaps in position. A wee bit of trimming. I actually trimmed a wee bit too much off that flap there. I don't know if you can see, but there's a wee bit more of a gap than I would like to have had. So next step is the upper wing panel, the 3mm panel. Now, the plans ask you to cut oversize, which I did. I cut oversize at the front and I sanded it down and stuff. But at the back there, where the flaps and the ailerons are, I made sure that was absolutely by the plan so that when it goes on, it fits perfect. So here I chose to use some hot glue at the back. I've got some Yoo-hoo pour along the ribs itself, and I've got some hot glue, just a small amount of hot glue so it doesn't ooze out, but enough to hold it in place. Line it up at the back and then hold it onto the wee supporting ribs at the back there. Once that's set, happy with that, move on to the front. Obviously there's contact glue along the ribs underneath the wing panel, and then again at the front there I'm just using some hot glue all the way along the contact surface, and then just hold it down, bend it across and hold it into place. I did actually form it slightly over the table as well, but it fitted superb. A wee bit of glue along the inside part next to the strake. Squeezed it down so that it was touching both sides, and then just wiped away any excess. And then do the exact same with the opposite wing. But the plans itself fit absolutely superb. Again, some glue along the ribs, and then use some hot glue along the back and move on to the front. So here we are moving on to the elevators. So I've got the rod marked out, push that through. I've got some epoxy in there, slide it up to the inside, and I printed a wee, I think it was a 2mm spacer, and then slid them in. There is, I've not got it on video here, but there's wee locating pins at the back there. I didn't choose to use the conformal tanks. Sanded everything down. There was no need for the twin canopy support piece, but sanded everything as best as I could, and it looks absolutely stunning. I did the underside and stuff as well. So that's it, pilots. My take on the F-15 build from Craig at Jetworks. Here we are, just testing the control surfaces. I'm sure some of you have seen it on the forum online. And it looks absolutely brilliant. I so can't wait. Unfortunately, I didn't include the canopy, how I went about doing this. There's the air brake working, so chuffed with that. But I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the other builds that he's come up with. Once I had it built, I just laid down some cheap acrylic paint, got the base done, a wee light sand, taped off the spacing there for the stripes, a wee smiley face under the air brake panel just for surprise, and then the finished job as it all sits there ready for its maiden. So thanks for staying this long. I hope it's helped you pilots some way along the way and actually move forward to building the F-15. Thank you.